Welcome. This is the first week of our journey towards assessing and planning the future. And this week, we're going to concentrate on establishing an understanding of the subject matter in its broadest sense and some of the underlying factors that are relevant and important. Right at the outset, I want to just try and focus your minds onto the different levels of planning, strategizing, as shown by this diagram, and try and put into context what each one refers to. I think it's important so that you can actually see in your own organisations where each level sits, based upon the sort of comments that I'm going to make now. At the high level, we would describe a network strategy as being one that coordinates actions among allies, and this would effectively define a purpose where no one participant could achieve it alone, but collectively they can. And it's when strategists ally with others, planners get together with others, that they don't formally control. So an example might be someone like Multiple Firm Alliance, the Star Alliance, for instance, which is the partnership between United, Lufthansa, Swissair, Turkish Airlines, etc., etc., etc. So that could be seen to be a network strategy. A corporate strategy, and we're coming into the realms of what this module is really focusing on. It's about the broad domain and funding for a portfolio of business units. And so this relates to any organisation, corporation, that can identify the different industries in which subunits will engage. And that could be, for instance, General Electric operating in airline industry, in domestic electricity components, etc., etc. It could be your own organisations, whether it's insurance or whether it's travel or whatever. Where there is a multiplicity of industries, generally relates to a corporate strategy. A business or organisational strategy, requires specific decisions at a lower level around the questions of what are we doing, whom, how, for whom, and why, and is effectively making strategic questions around one or a related cluster of competitive businesses. And if we take the GE example, this could be its strategy specifically around the jet engines business unit, as opposed to the electrical appliances bit, and both of them would feed into the corporate strategy mentioned above. The next level is the functional or operating strategy, and this supports the business strategy, the one above it, in areas such as information technology, HR, R&D, functional support, and it's the more detailed level of planning necessary to have the desired outcomes from the business activity. So in developing a business unit strategy, the functional or operating strategy provides the functional activities to support the business unit objectives. For instance, in the context of Nike and their latest running gear, the marketing activities would fall under the functional strategy level. And finally, at an individual strategy level, this is what directs efforts by individuals in or outside the organisation to protect and enhance their own development. So an individual strategy is what you're all doing now. It's your plan to get ahead in the world and be recognised for your knowledge and competence, says he very loosely. Um, so, interestingly, and I know some people regularly talk about the fact that strategy is not communicated throughout the organisation. An effective plan strategy will actually go from bottom to top and top to bottom, or should I say, top to bottom and bottom to top, and interconnect all the way through. You know, if it starts at network, or maybe it doesn't start till business unit strategy, but good process will also include individual strategies, which is interesting when we come to talk about the balanced scorecard approach, which I will look at later on in the course. If we had a crystal ball, it would be very helpful to be able to look into the future and determine whether or not any plan that we make had been effective. Um, Although I sometimes wonder if having crystal balls could be more disconcerting than supporting. However, in this instance, let's try and establish what the characteristics of an effective plan in the strategic context might be. And the first one I want to look at is the fact that we have developed in our plan an ability to communicate to others, and that's communicate, particularly within the organisation, around what the desired objective is, what it is we're trying to achieve, and subsequently communicating that throughout the organisation. And this is identifying what will be done in terms of typically the product or service or customer experience that we're looking to create. Who will do the work internally in terms of the personnel, the department, the functions within the organisation, how the work will be done, and this usually includes the when and the where questions. Then, very specifically at the customer end, both who the customers will be, i.e., who will be offered the results, the fruits of our labour, and why they would be expected to pay the value that we attach to it. So being very clear about what their expectations are of value relating to the product or service we're providing. So this compelling purpose is both an internal and external exercise, and relates to being very clear to the organisation about what it is that we do, who does it, etc., etc., and very clear about how that's driven from a customer perspective, and indeed how we communicate to them that we have a value proposition they ought to engage in. The plan will also, should also, if it's been effective, connect organisational strengths with environmental opportunities. What do we mean by that? Well, on the one hand, we operate at three different levels. We have the organisation, the firm, that operates within a given industry sector, which in turn operates within the wider commercial or public sector, perhaps, environment. So, as an organisation, if we have achieved an effective strategy, we will have effectively connected what we're good at with the opportunities that exist in the wider environment, or indeed what we're not very good at and the threats that are perceived from the external environment. To do all this, we need a vision, we need an understanding of what the company should be or should do, and don't be confused by the touchy-feely corporate social responsibility angle. That's important, but what the heck is this organisation about is an even more important question. So we will deal with mission statements and vision, and it's an area of particular concern and interest for me. But at this point in time, if we are developing an effective strategy, it will have connected with what we're about as an organisation. An effective strategy will also exploit current success and explore new opportunities. What do we mean? Well, in terms of exploration, our research, our examination of what's out there in those two external environments, the industry and the wider environment, will lead us to understand that we can actually potentially create new ideas, new processes, new product services from unfamiliar resources and activities, things that we might not do currently, but are linked in some way to our competence. And that's an interesting examination. The exploitation, on the other hand, as opposed to exploration, is about trying to leverage, or that's the American terminology, leverage strategies, plans, whereby we're using our existing current resources and activities and trying to create additional value from those. So that's about exploiting and exploring new opportunities. Our effective plan will generate more resources than it uses, and that is a reflection of the fact that investment costs money, and we cannot therefore use resources in an unlimited manner without replenishing them in some form or another. And generally, the balance has to be, we need to achieve more resources than we're spending, which reflects the profit or surplus element. Our effective plan will have coordinated and guided activities. It will provide a template, a route map to how the organisation will respond to the different elements of a particular plan going forward. And finally, it will respond. It will be seen to have responded to new conditions over time. The ongoing process of discovery, new resources being available, new activities being developed and supported, it will reflect the entrepreneurial nature of individuals and or the organisation, explicit and implicit ideas and thoughts that have developed over time, both from an internal perspective and indeed understanding where and when innovation is being driven in the wider environment. And it will, in terms of responding to new conditions over time, illustrate patterns of behaviour and allow us to determine if what I would describe as cultural aspects that apply to organisations, all the things of an internal nature that actually we do without thinking because they become cultural, but can actually drive and influence the direction that the company moves in. And we will be exploring some of these. In your pack of material this week, you'll come across an article written by a chap called Daniel Simpson. And there's quite a lot in there, but I'm particularly interested in its references to vision and mission statement. And it reflects quite clearly my views on the subject. Now, I have no wish to influence others as to what is right and what is wrong about vision and mission statements, but I do think there's a debate that needs to be had about the effectiveness and what they're trying to achieve. And this visual definition slide effectively says, does your mission statement adequately portray the answers to these questions? Now, if it doesn't mean to say it's a bad mission statement. What I am suggesting is that this visual definition really highlights the sort of clues that a mission statement, a vision statement, should be looking to communicate. At the very least, the reason why the organisation exists and how its basic activities are developed and focused. And an exercise for you would be to actually reflect on your own organisation's commitment statement in the context of both Daniel Simpson and this visual definition. And I'd be glad to receive some communication from those that feel that they want to share it. The discussion board isn't up and running yet, so we can't actually run it as a discussion. But if you feel strongly enough about it, or feel you have a comment to make, then by all means let us know your thoughts over the next week or so. This activity will encompass you effectively thinking about, in detail what industry your company competes in. Um, and I would caution you here as to the fact that it's not so much what industry does your contact centre operate or compete in, uh, but the overall organisation. What is the industry that competes in? What does your organisation actually do? Does it, obviously, as it says, make things, advertise things, design things? Can it be seen in this way? How successful is the company? And that's not oh, we are a successful or we're not very successful. It's a question that actually asks, does your company understand how it measures success as much as what is the quotient of success? Um, and here's another question: what factors uh, will affect success next year? To what extent have next year's potential operating conditions been borne in mind with regard to the planning of the organisation? More questions: what does the company make? Who does the work? Where is it done? How? When? Etc. Etc. Those questions that I talked about earlier. To what extent are they used when shaping mission or vision statements for the organisation? At the same time as asking questions regarding what the organisation does do, perhaps it's also useful to consider sometimes what would happen if we said no or asked the question no. Um, and this is often a confirmation and in a communication for the benefit of the organisation in being very clear about what the organisation doesn't do in terms of the same issues that we considered earlier. Um, and I suppose the purpose of this is it moves us away from we can do anything for anyone to being very clear about what our specific activities are about and what are excluded from that and which customers are we excluding and which activities are we excluding for the purposes of individual direction. So it's often as good a question as any to ask what shouldn't we be doing, or being very explicit about what we shouldn't be touching at all. The opportunity for some philosophical discussion here around the idea of sometimes about saying no when there are too many priorities. There are no priorities. Do we actually become more effective by having lots and lots of priorities? I suspect no, and in this subject area as well, it's about focusing on the most important issues rather than trying to absorb every individual issue. Fact supported by Bill Gates in what he said, identify the most important things and focus on them. And indeed, if you are to believe the politicians, there's a certain politician who talked about the same things and espoused the same virtues. I'll leave you to make up your mind on that one. I like this quotation or dialogue which appeared relating to Southwest Airlines. And the interviewer is saying, why aren't you going global, going for the biggest, going for whatever's out there? And the response is very clearly, we focused, we know exactly what our resources can and can't do. We know exactly where we are in the context of the size of the organisation and the size of the industry. And from that point of view, we've got more than enough to go on with what we're doing. And it's concentrating on getting that right rather than prioritising ourselves beyond the realistic. And that is, it's not a question of an organisation saying no. He's certainly saying no to the interviewer, but he's saying that we're very clear about where our priorities are and how we should be addressing them. With this slide, of course, I'm interested to see if you can identify what Ryanair might have said no to and what EasyJet might have said yes to. But I prefer that you use the thought process as much about your own organisation as about these two, your own or another organisation in the same space that you operate in. It's interesting to actually step back and say, what have we consciously or subconsciously as an organisation said no or yes to? And that difference between conscious and subconscious reflects a great deal about the organisation knowing specifically where it's at and what it does. Things might have been excluded or included simply because it happened without any prior knowledge or thought. And in strategic or planning terms, it could be seen to be leading potentially to we can call strategic drift, where the activities of the organisation don't necessarily match what the market is looking for. Just for reference, Ryanair has said no to air bridges, has said no to ground staff, has said no to, putting the customer at the forefront of its service quality delivery, although we did talk about this, and in some ways they perhaps are at the forefront. It's just that they know very specifically what their customers will accept, given the nature of their operation. Interestingly, with EasyJet, it's almost becoming, in my mind, the acceptable face of low-cost airlines now. I prefer to travel with them than Ryanair. I get the feeling they've got more customer service, but then in the same discussion as Ryanair, perhaps they haven't. Perhaps they're sort of in the middle of trying to deliver customer service, but not really recognising, as Ryanair do, that customer service is not critical at the low end of the market for short-haul journeys. So it's quite interesting debate around that, and I wonder if you could have the same debates with your colleagues about what you do and do not do in your organisations. To summarise this little section, we can put two areas together. One, the vision and mission, the how, why, where, what, whom, when, and all that sort of thing, together with the areas that can be identified as an effective strategy, and see that there is a connection. Effective strategy will be driven by a clear mission and purpose for the organisation. Without that, there's almost a bit of a disconnect. At the heart of any planning strategic process is the need to recognise how much research and knowledge is generated to provide a justifiable course of action going forward. This information gathering effectively provides us with the alternative courses of action that go to make strategies and plans going forward. So we can't underestimate the importance of information gathering. And at the very least, if that's all we do, and we don't go forward from that point, we can be seen to be better informed than we were before we started the process. So that's important. But then what we're doing is taking the three distinct environments and creating a database of knowledge that will allow us to make decisions going forward. These three environments that I refer to can be seen in this diagram specifically the general environment, which is the outer circle, reflects those things that are happening in our world, both legally, politically, technologically, that aren't necessarily specific to our industry, but could well impact upon on our products or services in some way or another. The middle, not the middle, the circle inside from that, you know, which looks at customers and suppliers and all that sort of thing, is very much about what's happening within our industry, within the specific business environment in which we operate. And again, we should be exploring to discover what it is that we can find out. And I'll be touching on that in the next slide. The final one is the very internal circle, which refers to us, our organisation, and in the culmination of our research and information gathering, our introspective view, what are we as an organisation like, will form the basis of the strengths and weaknesses of a typical SWOT analysis. The opportunities and threats will come from the general and the specific industry operating environment. Michael Porter gave us a very useful model for considering that specific operating environment, industry environment that I've referred to, and he talks about five forces that impact upon an organisation, and these are broken down as potential entrants, potential substitutes, the power of suppliers, the power of buyers, and in the middle, the competitive rivalry. And if we take these one at a time, in terms of the potential entrants, Porter suggests that we discover whether or not the market requires any one organisation to have particular knowledge to be successful, and the degree to which that knowledge requirement is going to hinder potential entrance into the industry. He suggests we should understand how easy it is to set up in business for a potential entrant. Does it take a few £100 or a few £1,000,000? Is branding important in the market? Then this might be a problem for new entrants. Overall, what is the potential threat from new entrants coming into our space? Do we understand that? Can we comprehend that? He talks about substitutes. How is it easier for customers to switch to another type of product or service? Transport, you might be saying, I have a car, but it would be very easy if cars get blocked up to get on a train. Equally, one could say, I have a car, but I live in the countryside, and it would be not very easy at all to find a substitute for my car. There are many examples of substitutes: butter, margarine, etc., etc. So, to what extent do our users, our customers, to what extent can they find ready-made substitutes and are prepared to switch? I suspect that could be quite interesting in the context of the industry that you guys are involved in, or the specific segment of the industry that you're involved in, insofar as customer contact is evolving, and to what extent are customers happy, clients, users, whatever, to use alternative methods, and will this influence how they contact you going forward? Porter also talked about the power of suppliers. Where's the balance of power between suppliers and firms? Too much supplier power makes the market unattractive. Where one or a small number of suppliers have significant power, it's not particularly attractive to everybody else participating in the marketplace. And he asks how easy it is to switch suppliers that offer an equivalent or superior product or service. And that difference between power resting in the suppliers and power resting in consumers is actually quite users is quite interesting. Think of the analogy with energy suppliers. It used to be one supplier. You paid what you were told to pay, and that was it. Now we've got all these price comparisons, different suppliers, energy suppliers, which make life potentially an awful lot more interesting from a service point of view and a consumer's point of view. He talks about the power of buyers. Where's the balance of power between buyers and the firms in the market? Too much buyer power makes the market unattractive. So, where where a buyer has many opportunities to purchase the similar product, where we have lots of competitors, then it becomes less attractive to us. How easy would it be for our customer, our user, to drop what we do and use another competitor instead? And these are interesting questions that allow us to understand our relative competitive position in the marketplace. In that context, slap bang in the middle, the rivalry is about, is there room in the market for all of us? That will depend on whether the market is growing. If it is, that increases the attractiveness. Conversely, if the market is contracting, then the rivalry may be much more intense. This isn't saying here is an answer. It's encouraging us to reflect on the different layers in the industry and how they impact upon the competitive rivalry both today and in the future. So the bedrock of any future plan, of any future objectives, of any future anything for the organisation is about knowledge, and this diagram illustrates the summary or the areas that go to make up both the operating and the general environments, general environment, external factors that could be impacting upon what we do. And it's often called PESTEL or some such a acronym which reflects political, economic, social, technical, legislative, and another one that I can't remember off the top of my head, but they are there. And it's basically because I can't see what the other E is on a small screen as I'm dictating this. So they'll fall within the framework of one of those, and it's getting on your bike time and going to find out. I am going to go through some research that I did. I'm not going to do it in this session, but perhaps one of the later sessions to sort of show how some of these research activities can actually deliver some very key planning and strategic messages going forward. But really we should be asking lots of questions and interrogating how any of these factors are going to impact upon A, the industry, and B, the organisation, and how they will inform us in the context of the likes of Porter's Five Forces, the slide I've just been showing you. I want to look at this diagram again to emphasise that the heart of the planning strategy process, as I have and will continue to emphasise, is underpinned by good information, which comes out of this this PESTEL or the analysis element that we've been discussing. And something that is not well researched is likely to have flaws. Certainly beware the individual that comes in with a fully funded, fully costed model the day after thinking about it. It might represent hours and hours and hours of dedicated work going through cost-benefit analysis or whatever, but is probably going to be floundering on some basic concepts that come out of the sort of research that should be undertaken, the justifications behind it from an internal or external perspective. One could say that this doesn't necessarily apply to the entrepreneurs in this world, the Bransons, etc. And whilst that is true, inherent in their makeup is the ability to assimilate knowledge that mere mortals would generally have to go and research in depth, and that their concept, their idea, is based around a volume of knowledge that they've assimilated over time that reflects a typical pestle analysis. Equally, where there is what I've described as a kernel of strategy, a sudden insight, that might well have been exploited through into a fully blown strategy. This doesn't always work without the baseline research required. The example I give here is something like Napster, who brought a wonderfully innovative concept to market that was bought into by millions globally, but had a fundamental flaw because the basic research element around the legislation, the legal environment, or the legal aspects of the environment, precluded them from providing such a service, even though the service was well thought out, well positioned, and benefited from the global expansion of the World Wide Web. Conversely, then, if something is well researched, it has a far greater chance of success, and is identifiable because of that. It will demonstrate that the processes involve connecting objectives of the organisation with what's out there in terms of an understanding of the environment externally through the analysis that we've undertaken. It will also demonstrate that the position that we recommend is actually viable within the environment, that it is underpinned, justified, again, by the research that we've undertaken. And therefore there is a logic in how we coordinate our activities in pursuit of this approach. It also suggests that the thoughts of, for instance, Professor Jim March from Stanford University. This is just another slide that I thought might be helpful in understanding or bringing some more, putting some more flesh on the bones of the exploitation, exploration approach. And you can look at this in a little bit more detail and see what you make of it. I think it's quite useful to sort of see it in this broader context. Our description of strategy so far is, as long as you're in presentation mode, if you click on the camera symbol on this slide, it will lead you to a clip from South Park, which I love in the context of what we're just going to talk about now, and indeed it refers to much about the planning process. But have a look at it and see what you think, and hopefully the next slide after that will become evident. Something that's often neglected in the analysis phase, which is what we've been looking at in this session, is the bias of the planner or strategist. I want to spend a bit of time just looking at what I call hidden flaws and blind spots in the process, because I think it's very important. The first blind spot, if you like, and some of these were identified by Michael Porter in some of his work on strategy, is this bad money after good situation, where resource investment or increase continue and continue even when disconfirming evidence surfaces. We might find out that the initial analysis was flawed, or the competitive environment has changed, or our own capabilities internally have diminished. But still the organisation continues to put resources into the plan. To mitigate this, and we'll learn about this certainly within our finance class in another module, we should be using things like cost-benefit analysis. We should have reference to best practice and bad practice, based decisions on fact, not emotion, and almost double check, verify our decision making with people who aren't necessarily involved on a day-to-day basis. The second blind spot is what I'll call limited frame of reference. And this is where individuals, decision makers, planners, are limited in their ability to objectively assess the probability of outcomes. And this then relies on an individual's idiosyncratic experiences. I mean, we are a culmination of what we've read, of what we've seen, what we've touched, etc. So, having a devil's advocate for a planning process is a good idea. Being aware of the limitations and cautious about jumping to conclusions too soon is also important. Invalid assumptions are another blind spot, and this is about the projections of what may happen being considered by decision maker or makers, and can be flawed by three very primary assumptions or manifestations. And it's where things are unchallenged, where there's a corporate myth, or where there's a corporate taboo, if you like. Have we considered this in the wider context, or are we relying on the internal good news that will then embrace all other potential problems and make them go away? So, being very open-minded about the external perspectives and incorporating them. One area that is important with regard to research in particular is how the sample for research is constructed. When you come to your dissertation, one of the things that you'll find is that there are some very strict approaches to methodologies for research, and within that is how we identify and construct a sample. And the higher you get in the academic framework, the greater the rigor and the statistical significance of research becomes. And to the uninitiated, we tend to have organisations and researchers and planners tend to generalise about a population or class of study based upon either a small sample being used, a non-random sample, or indeed an unrepresentative sample. So we need to be clear, if we want our plan, our strategy to work, that any research that we're doing has a basis that can be relied on in terms of significance statistically. Then there's the deal maker's curse, the desire of a key executive or team to win a deal, but without actually remembering that ultimately it could result in a losing proposition for the company. It could be too high a price or some other aspect. It's often driven by the ego of players. And in my institution, there are lots of examples of academics believing that something is very important because it fits within their own narrow time frame or research frame. When in terms of the organisation, it's not important. In fact, it could be damaging. I remember Time Warner and AOL when they got together a few years ago now, talked about the wonderful future, but and the synergies that the collaboration would bring together. But in actual fact, in a very short space of time, they were writing down $100 billion because they'd overestimated the synergies. So we need to, recognise critical success factors and try and understand how the end game will look, preferably ahead of time. Problem framing. This is the inability of a decision maker to take the time to frame the problem. I harp on about this in my quality module and business improvement module. Do we understand root cause? Can we frame an issue? Only then can we start to think about sensible solutions. So identifying and prioritising options that are available. Overconfidence. We're all overconfident. We're overconfident in our own ability to solve problems, and we're overconfident in that we know always know the best alternative early in the process. The default there is we don't get adequate buy-in and we don't provide enough supporting data. It's a human flaw, although I would say there are people to whom it's not a flaw, and I think this does impact on the touchy-feely bit in terms of team participation and the like, and how people are either driven to not take shortcuts, but to overestimate their own importance and knowledge in something, and others who are very deliberate and determined to ensure they get the right information. So in the process, we need to encourage debate, and we need to integrate worst case scenarios into our thinking to ensure that we've got it right, or at least mitigated our over-enthusiasm. As a species, also we have a tendency to avoid loss. We're generally risk averse and will seek the lowest conflict outcomes. And there's nothing wrong with that, except that it can stifle creativity and innovation. And as long as we're aware that it can be a limiting factor, particularly, and I keep going back to this word, the culture of the organisation, where people within the organisation are not encouraged to be innovative and creative. And the final blind spot here is what I call sending good news bias. And this again reflects culture to an extent, whereby the reward system is about receiving good news over bad news. And we get sucked into this nobody wants to hear bad news approach, which unfortunately can actually become embedded in the culture of the organisation. And we should be appraising and balancing performance, not incentivising people just purely on good news. We should always be encouraging the organisation and people there to manage expectations more appropriately, and have transparency. That should be a priority. within an organisation to ensure that we're getting a comprehensive overview of any given situation. So these are the blind spots that Porter first introduced and which have been extended and enlarged, if you like. Okay, so that's the end of the formal input, if you like, for this week. But you have got some homework, children. Excuse me, and attached you will find, or should I say, in the email that all this is contained in will be some more stuff. The article from relating to Daniel Simpson that I talked about, and the one that you're going to have a look at in the context of your own organisational mission statement. There's a one-page case study which I mentioned previously to you, but I want you to do it now. I want you to look at this case study and just try and highlight the scope of the operating environment and the general environment to see if you can clearly distinguish between the two. I mean, it's a bit simplistic, but you know, I picked it to suit the cohort that I'm dealing with. I'm only joking. So I want you to just try and see if you can do the analysis bit relating to the general environment, the operating environment, and indeed the internal environment, and see if you can prioritize a SWOT analysis, or all the factors into a SWOT analysis with no more than 5 items in each of the 4 quadrants, if you can do that, please. I've also included 3 articles, 2 by Mintzberg, and these are specifically, well, not specifically, they're general articles around strategy. One's called Crafting Strategy, and the other one is The Fall and Rise of Strategic Planning, and they're just some general overviews. And then the other one that I've included is again, an article published in the Harvard Business Review by Lavallo and Kahneman, talking about delusions of success, how optimism undermines executive decision making. So I thought you might be interested in having a read of those. And if you could do that, I'd be much appreciated. There is one more slide which I'd like you to consider, I think, after this one. Okay, just in closing for the week, I'm going to appeal to you, and this is not for any massaging of egos. This is really going to be valuable for me and us in our planning going forward. This is the first time we have actually done something like this as an online delivery, and I need to get some feedback from you guys and girl, sorry Rachel, about how you felt this went. Was it an appropriate mechanism? Is my voice boring? Is it too long, too short? Not enough imagery, not enough material posted? I'm trying to get some feedback so that we can move forward. You know, and all things are possible, but please do contribute by email or whatever. It will help me, and then I can make sure that we've got this organised. I am of the opinion that we might do 2 weeks of this, but we need a 3rd week, which is at least live, where you can see a face or interrupt or do something. But any comments and suggestions would be greatly appreciated. Take care all, thanks very much, and we'll speak to you next week.